Good morning. My name is Michelle Lavelle Henry. I'm a member of the Social Justice Ministry team. We build the social justice forums around a common theme. In this program year, our theme is diving deeper together so all will flourish. This theme builds on our heightened awareness of the systemic and critical issues affecting our community, brought to greater attention in recent years, most especially in the response to the murder of George Floyd. Through the forums, we will learn about long-standing needs and become more prepared to support the flourishing of all members in our community. Today, we welcome Cynthia Prosek, Executive Director, and Tina Sigel, Program Director of Restorative Justice Community Action, a Westminster community partner. They will discuss community-based restorative justice alternatives to the criminal legal system as we deepen the work of racial equality. Just a couple of housekeeping items. For those attending in person in the Meisel room, please raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you so all, including the live stream, will hear the question and answer. For those attending on the live stream, please submit your comments or questions in the live stream chat, and we'll monitor that and raise your question and comment upon that. With that, we'll turn it over to Cynthia and Tina. Thank you.
Well, welcome those that are here, and I'll try to remember there's a world of people out there also tuning in, I hope. Thank you for allowing me and Cynthia to be in this space with you and for you being here this morning. I want to first do something that we often do in our work, so kind of, demonstrate some of the work that we do, and especially around what has happened this week at the Bolero Flats. We can't, I'm sure we're all feeling lots of things in our bodies and our hearts and in our minds around that. And based on our proximity to that space and just all that's happened this week, I wanted to take just a couple minutes before we get into talking about our program to just ground ourselves and slow ourselves down. And slowing down is a large part of the work that we do. So we want to sort of live into that right now. So wherever you are, at home, if you're sitting in a chair, or here in a chair, or if you're at home lying down while you're watching this, just close your eyes and either feel your feet flat on the floor, make connection to the ground. Just feel your feet, and if you're laying down, feel whatever part of your body is touching whatever you're laying on. Just feel it pressing into that couch or that chair. And if you're in a chair and you need to slide a little bit forward, or whatever you're on, to make sure that your feet can feel the ground, and just kind of notice that for a moment. And maybe tense your push from your thighs down even further, push into the ground. Feel those muscles tightening in your legs as you're making contact with the ground, with the earth. And just feel what that feels like in your legs. Are they a little quivery? How does it feel to touch the earth even that much more with your feet? Where are your feet touching the ground? Where is your body touching whatever surface you're on? And just feel yourself pushing, using your muscles to push yourself into that deeper down into the earth. And then we want to do a little breathing exercise, very simple, and do this based on your own abilities to, around your breathing. But think of it this way: to breathe in, but then when you breathe out, that your breath out should be twice as long as your breath in. So I don't want to necessarily do a count for you because everybody's breathing is different. But for you, think of what is a breath in, but then a breathing out that is twice as long as your breath in. And then just notice every time you do that, what you're feeling in your body. So we'll do that 3 times. I think we'll start there. So breathe in, and then breathe out as you need to. So if you're breathing in on 4, breathe out in 8. If you're breathing in on 5, make your out breath twice as long. Okay, and just notice how you're feeling any more grounded, how your body is feeling, what sensations you're feeling, and I'll just leave you with that. Thank you. I'm going to start with an opening reading to continue to get us grounded in this work and being in community together. This is by Margaret Wheatley. It's called Turning to One Another. There is no power greater than a community discovering what it cares about. Ask what's possible, not what's wrong, and then keep asking. Notice what you care about. Assume that many others share your dreams. Be brave enough to start a conversation that matters. Talk to people you know. Talk to people you don't know. Talk to people you never talk to. Be intrigued by the differences you hear. Expect to be surprised. Treasure curiosity more than certainty. Invite in everybody who cares to work on what's possible. Acknowledge that everyone is an expert about something. Know that creative solutions come from new connections. Remember, you don't fear people whose story you know. Real listening always brings people closer together. Trust that meaningful conversations can change your world. Rely on human goodness. Stay together. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about the work that our organization does, a small piece of the pie around restorative practices. So we're with Restorative Justice Community Action. That's our organization. We're located right in Loring Park, across from the Walker on Groveland. And so let's talk about how do we understand restorative justice. One of the best ways is to contrast it to our criminal legal system. So justice has different lenses. We use a restorative lens. Our current system uses a retributive lens, and it asks the questions of what law was broken, who did it, and what punishment do they deserve, right? Pretty straightforward. That's generally how our system works. In restorative, through a restorative lens, we ask who has been hurt? Who are the victims? Who's been harmed? What are their needs? What does the victim need? And what are the obligations? And whose are they? Who's responsible to repair harm? Who should be in that space to decide that? And what about the needs of those who have harmed? They may have them too. So it blurs and makes more complex our relationship to each other. Our criminal legal system says crime is an act against the state, right, a violation of a law. An offender, person who does the harm, is accountable to the state, and accountability equals suffering, meaning you will be punished, maybe you'll be put in prison, maybe you'll be isolated, maybe you won't be able to participate in community and general life, you can't work perhaps, whatever that punishment looks like. And then victims are not primary participants in the process. Victims don't have a lot to say around what happens or what their needs are. Lawyers, judges, in an adversarial environment, work out deals and pleas, and it's a win-lose proposition. And again, victims very rarely have a voice or a say in what they want. In restorative justice, we look at harm as an act against another person and community. We know that we all are harmed either directly or indirectly by the things that people do. So that person who does harm is accountable to the victim, to the community, and to themselves. Accountability is defined as taking responsibility and taking action to repair the harm. Victim perspective is essential to understand the harm and determine what might help repair the harm and how. So getting those who have harmed together with those who have been harmed to share stories about how people have been affected and hear stories of how those who have done harm, why, how, what led you to do what you did, helps us all to grow and understand each other so that when we make the gesture of making right, that it's long-lasting, that it changes people's behaviors. It changes us as those who have been harmed, and indirectly as well as directly, how we see each other and the world. So we all have a stake in that outcome. So we generally look at restorative justice as holding three pillars. There's a harm that's happened, and there's the needs of those who have been harmed, and I will venture to say the needs of those who have done harm. There's obligations to repair, make amends, say sorry, right? Feel some sort of remorse. And then there's the engagement. Who is a part of that decision making? So it's those who have harmed, those who have been harmed, and anyone else in whatever that community might look like. Who needs to be there other than just the people we usually see in our criminal legal system?
All right. So, and I'm Cynthia, and the Restorative Justice Community Action has been rooted in this kind of neighborhood. We started in the late 90s with Stevens Square, downtown East and West, Loring Park, and Elliott Park neighborhoods worked together to start a program around restorative work because they wanted to deal with the revolving door of what they saw as community livability crimes. And so the 5 neighborhoods got together and decided this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this together. And that was called the Central City Neighborhood Partnership. And so we started working with the city of Minneapolis in 97 was our first actual case. And I started volunteering in 98, so I've been with the organization since then, mostly as volunteer and now as staff. So we started back in 97, and everything was there was a lot of work going on in both training community members and facilitators, and I got involved originally because I was part of the neighborhood board of Plymouth when I was a member there. So, and I know Westminster's been a very long time partner of Restorative Justice Community Action, also providing space for our conferences and also providing funding. So our main activity has been community conferencing. That's what we started in the 90s, and that's been the mainstay of our type of program. We've expanded from there, but that's really about bringing in the community to have a part of say of, let's meet these people, find out, we need to have a say in how, the things that are like considered anonymous behaviors are listed as crimes still affect the community, and so the community wanted to have an impact in that, so that's what that's why we used community conferencing in that, so we always have community as part of our process. In 2005 is when we expanded to be an actual organization, so we became a nonprofit in 2005. What was missing in there in 2003, we also partnered with the University of Minnesota and did a lot of underage consumption cases. We were getting about 250 to 300 cases a year for quite a while as a university area, and the community around that area really wanted to turn around the underage consumption and all the partying and it was, I think, after the soccer riots that there was really a big push to really deal with an underage consumption. That's changed a lot, if you notice. We hardly have any cases now in misdemeanor consumption because the culture is changing over there. The laws around amnesty, which is treating it like if people call because their friend who they've been drinking with needs to go to the hospital, that's treated more as a health thing rather than being a crime. So we've been able to really eliminate a lot of younger people getting stuck into the system. So in 2005, we became a nonprofit and we started expanding throughout the city of Minneapolis. 2008 was a financial downturn, and part of our work is not just working with community and dealing with livability issues, but really collaborating with other community organizations to provide services of restorative work across the city and across the county. And in 2008, we joined together as many agencies and worked as one entity to ask for funding from the city. So therefore, we weren't fighting one another for funds, but we were working collaboratively, starting our collaborative work around finances. And we continued to work collaboratively around finances, but also about creating a web of restorative work around the city and around the Twin Cities area. In 2010, that means we also expanded into the youth work. We also started partnering with Hennepin County with drug court and with felony diversion. And just in 2019, right before COVID hit, we were starting a new program to work with youth on probation, where we have community circle keepers journey alongside the probation officer and the youth and their support system to move through probation and have the decision-making happen in that circle rather than having the prosecutor, the investigating probation officers, the judge, all deciding for the youth what they need. Instead, the youth and their support system, the community circle keepers, and the PO work together to say, okay, what is this situation? What's going to help you really move and create a pathway forward that is sustainable for yourself once you're out of the system? So it's really about developing a long-term trajectory based on the youth rather than about all these different things we think we need to do to fix the youth. So it's really having the youth at the center of it. In 2020, RJCA became the lead agency for the Trust Network, which is about early response, early warning for community conflict. So we started getting involved in identifying who's doing the work of healing, who's doing the work of helping resolve conflict within the communities, and how can we help bring them all together and understand and give a positive spin on what everybody sees as all the negative that's happening, like with the Bolero Flats, with the shooting over at Bolero Flats. There's a lot of community work that's going on too. It's not just a negative event, but the community is working to do the healing, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then, and just this year, RJCA is partnering with Minnesota Peacebuilding Leadership Institute, and Manu Lewis, who's a community leader up in North Minneapolis, and trained and worked with restorative justice and nonviolent peace force. We are creating, we're working with one Minneapolis neighborhood to train them in the strategies on trauma awareness and resiliency. They're being trained in restorative justice, and that core group of community members from that neighborhood are going to help develop a public safety model that's based in their community, built on the principles of trauma awareness and resiliency and restorative justice. And we're going to mentor them for about 4 months after they go through all the training and develop that model. So what we are in restorative is that we are embedded in the community and then helping the community find the answers for itself. And that's exactly what restorative justice even does with the people who have committed harm and people who are affected by that harm, is that they have the answers. We just need to create the space for them to find out what those answers are together. So like I said, we have lots of collaborative partners, and there are other organizations that do restorative work and other work, like Conflict Resolution Center does juvenile restorative work. They do some community restorative work. They also do mediation, so mediation in many different areas. Legal Rights Center, really big in advocacy. They're the ones that help promote restorative work in the legislature. They're the ones that helped us start that juvenile youth disposition program for the probation youth. Koinonia Leadership Academy is led by Dr. Talia Tolfree. She has worked primarily in the school systems, but has worked with the Legal Rights Center and RJCA to develop that youth disposition program. Also, Dr. Tolfree and RJCA started doing a lot of implicit bias conversations prior to COVID and George Floyd. Like I said before, Minnesota Peacebuilding Leadership Institute, they do a lot of STAR training, which is strategies for trauma awareness and resiliency. They do a lot of training around the cities and also nationally, but are really set those really good at for trauma. And also they do what they call coming to the table. If you've heard coming to the table, is conversations around people who have come out of from either being from slavery. It's really a conversation around slavery and where we are now. So it's people who have probably been those who might have had slaves and those who came from slavery, so that we have those conversations. Again, it's like an anti-racism or implicit bias conversation. So really having those hard racial dialogues. Seward Longfellow Restorative Justice is in Seward and Longfellow. They've been doing a lot of community work, but and also juvenile work. So our system partners, we have Minneapolis Police Department. We've actually, our juvenile teams, our juvenile restorative teams, agencies, we've been working with the Minneapolis Police Department since 2014 for juvenile diversion, and really identified racial equity as the main thing. So what we are doing is decreasing the amount of youth of color being the primary youth coming through diversion. So we're trying to increase racial equity in that, and that's been very good. They've been great partners in that. Minneapolis City Attorney's Office, they started with us in '97, and they continue to build with us, increasing restorative work within the city. Hennepin County Attorney's Office, both juvenile adults, that's how we're doing the work there. Hennepin County Juvenile Probation, where we're doing the diversion program, or the disposition program. And then we're also working with Ramsey County with juvenile diversion. So those are all our system partners that we have right now, along with working with many neighborhoods and communities.
Sorry. So I want to briefly talk about the model of restorative justice that we practice. There are many ways of practicing restorative justice and restorative practices in schools, victim offender dialogue in our correctional facilities. Many different, there's a spectrum of different ways. So we use a specific model that's called the community conferencing model. So what is conferencing? So it recognizes the community as victim of harm and empowers those affected community stakeholders, those community members, to have a direct role in resolving incidents that impact the community at large. There are 1 or 2 trained facilitators who guide a conversation between the referred participant. We notice we don't use the word offender because in restorative work you have to be, we are very mindful of harming language, and that should be never applied to anybody that's participating. So the person who has done the harm is the referred participant. They're referred to our program, and they've chosen to participate. So that's the language we use. So the facilitator, the referred participant, and community members, where we focus on the impact of the harm and how to make amends or repair the harm to the extent that we can. We talk about the harm that occurred, but we also talk about the person, who they are, what do they care about, who are the positive people in their life, what are their goals, what are their interests. So it's very holistic in that way. So by involving the larger community in this process, community conferencing can address harms that have hurt, that people have been hurt either directly, say through shoplifting, theft, someone stole your credit card, or financial fraud, or indirectly, where someone is caught with drugs, but you are not necessarily directly affiliated with it, but it's in our community. So really looking at the ripple effect of the harms that happen to those that are close to the person who's done the harm, to anyone that it might have been directly impacted, and also how does it affect the community. So we really do, as Cynthia mentioned, focus on empowering the participants, giving voice, having someone tell their story, which they may carry a lot of shame around, in a space with a bunch of strangers, takes a lot of courage to do. Can be a very vulnerable space and a courageous space. So we look at the underlying causes for accountability. What led you to do that? Why did you have meth on you? Tell us your story. What got you there? So that way people can process, it's not just the act that people do, but there is a whole story behind it. And by understanding the story, we can work towards repair that is hopefully long-lasting, life-changing, transformational, and restorative. So decisions are consensus-based and in an agreement which everyone can live with. So part of the conferencing is the storytelling and then creating an agreement to repair harm. And everybody does that together, the referred participant and the community members. Who was in the conference? 1 or 2 maybe facilitators, the referred participant, minimum of 2 community members, and those are our volunteers who no one gets paid to do this work. They do it because they get value out of it. And there may be a supporter, a referred participant may want to bring someone with them to that space, and they're welcome to do that. And sometimes we do have direct victims, not often, but if a victim wants to be there, they can, and as long as the referred participant is also okay with the victim there, we will invite a victim into that space. Sometimes we'll get victim impact statements instead of a victim coming that will be read at the conference. So that deepens the conversation and the story around what happened and the impact. And then we will have sometimes observers. If our referred participant is okay with people outside of our circle listening and watching, that's how our community members get to be community members, is by observing what this process looks like and feels like. So, as you know, it's a small space. Typically we would meet in person, but because of COVID for the past 2 years, we've been doing most of our conferences on Zoom. So we've been keeping it very intimate and trying to mimic as best we can that being present with each other. How do you do that on Zoom? How do you engage with each other around some hard stories? So some of the outcomes. it allows all of us, referred participants, community members, facilitators, to get outside our comfort zone and get closer to other people's stories. It's, I believe, the only way, one of the only ways that we really understand why people do what they do, how to create that sense of safety. If we understand the story, if we get closer to someone whose story we have no experience of. Learning about the forces that shape behavior. What are the root causes? Why do you have drugs on you? What had you steal somebody's mail? What had you do that? What was going on for you? What got you there? So understanding that helps us not label people as criminals, but as people who have done bad things, but maybe in their hearts truly good people, right? And we want to welcome them back into our community. It challenges our assumptions and our biases, and that's for everyone that participates. As community members, for sure, we can come into this space making up what we think, you know, how we feel about somebody and the harm they did, and come out feeling, wow, I've learned so much today. And we also, because we know who ends up mostly, who touches the criminal legal system mostly, you know, being in spaces with people of different races and ethnic backgrounds and cultures allow us to learn from each other and challenge ourselves in our assumptions around that. Those are some of those are just a few of the outcomes. And so,
Why don't you go back to that other slide, and we'll just leave it there. So Tina, this looks really like an easy thing to do. When a person comes in, it's like, oh, I just need to be myself. What are the things that you think they're feeling when they're walking into that space?
are you talking community members or everybody?
Let's start with community members. What do you think? You know, they're coming in and they want to do this work. What makes it really hard, or what things may they be thinking?
Yeah, they may be thinking, "Wow, I don't understand why somebody would do what they did." So we don't know if we're going to ask questions that may be harmful to people. What if I ask something and it's triggering for them? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't know what to say at all? Am I supposed to have a feeling about this if I don't have any connection to that harm or I haven't experienced it? So that's some of the things that our community members who are new to this may come into that feeling, because we're in a space with a stranger and we're talking about something, we're talking about a harm, and as we hear their story, it can be very moving. And so we have our own emotions and our own vulnerabilities that come up as community members. And how do you be in a space where that is vulnerable? How do you be engaged? How do you listen? Community members we're not fixing anybody. We're not there to shake our finger at somebody. We do not shame, we do not blame, and we do not judge. And that is really key to having somebody, a referred participant by the end of a conference, say, wow, thank you for not seeing me as a criminal. Thank you for listening to me. I haven't told my story to anyone since it happened. And I have a lot of shame about it, or whatever it is they're carrying. So, you know, how do we all together help bring, you know, each other to a place of a curiosity about the other, of being engaged and caring and supporting. And you find out in the course of a conference, you know, as we humanize each other all that much more, that there's so much more to somebody. And so it's challenging to be in a vulnerable space and with someone whose story you may feel, you know, you may come into with some assumptions about. So that's some of it. You want to add to that, Cynthia?
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is that, you know, it seems really clear, you know, we have retributive justice, we have restorative justice. It's like, so it's just, all we need to do is a mind flip. But it's really more than a mind flip, because it's an experience. A lot of us don't understand what restorative work is until we experience it. Because being in a place of non-judgment and still holding somebody accountable is not our normal way of thinking. It takes a while to figure that out. And that's okay if you're coming into this thing and you want to participate. It's going to take some time to be in a non-judgmental space, but still be able to hold somebody accountable. One way that we get our referred participants ready is that we meet them as people first. We say, so how are you doing today? When we meet with them to prepare them for the conference, we're talking about, so why don't you tell us your story? It's probably the first time that they've ever been able to actually tell their side of what they felt, how they went through this process, and that somebody's really listening to them about what's important about them. So we ask them kind of like, what happened? What led you to do that? And sometimes, like Tina was saying, that can be years of getting there. It's like, well, so how long have you been using? Because sometimes they'll go back to, I've been using since I've been a teenager. So what was the impetus for this specific reason? You know, what has happened? So really giving them a chance to examine and reflect on their own selves. And that's what the conference space is, a place where we all slow down and we can take time to examine ourselves, examine kind of what the situation is and how we're all related to it, how we can make impact in making positive changes for that. It's a place where we can stop and say, okay, let's look at this, let's take the time and let's figure out how we can move together. So after we ask like what led to it, we ask them, so who do you think was impacted by the behavior? How do you feel about what happened? What have you done since then? How have you dealt with it? What have you been working on? Some people have worked on, some people have already done all that inner work and done a lot of repairing on their own before they even get to the conference. Some others haven't even thought about it yet. They're still in that, it just happened, I'm feeling all the shame. I can't get past that sense of shame. I don't know how to deal with it. This is that first step of like really taking some of that shame layer away so that they can stop and look at it without it bringing that emotional barrier to making change. So we're helping to kind of strip down that emotional barrier of not changing. And then we talk about like who the supporters are in their life. Like who are the important people in their life? What goals do they have? And all that's brought into that conference. So everybody talks about kind of how they've been affected, kind of what happened, how they are dealt, how they deal with what's going on, and how we can move together. And how we move together is like, how can we help that individual be their best self from where they are right now? Not where we want them to be, where we think they should be, that they have to do this, but where are they now and how do we help them begin that journey? Because this is not an end-all, be-all, we're fixing things and they're walking out of here and they're going to be perfect if they just complete their agreement. It's like, these are the things that we want to help you build so that you can keep moving on your own. We're not going to do it for you, but we want to help you see that you have the power of doing this yourself.
Right, and also can't underestimate as community members what we get out of it and what we are, and what we are learning. Hearing a story of what led someone to do something that they did, to hear about, their life story that can sometimes be very tragic. What am I taking away as a community member about how have our systems failed us? What are our challenges in our culture and in our society? That I forgot to mention the community building, and this is community building experience. This is being in relationship with each other. So community members aren't any more knowledgeable of anything, right? We are all in this mess together. We all need each other, and we want someone who's done harm, we want them back in our community because they have gifts to offer. They have skills. We want them to be in our community so that we all feel safe and connected. So by addressing a harm, we build community in this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the whole idea of, we're primarily working in the criminal legal system, providing alternatives. That's our expertise as an organization, and we expand to some other work, but we're relying on our collaborative partners to help fill to create that web of services, that web of support in restorative work. But one of the fallacies of the criminal legal system is that, if we remove them, it's like you can remove a problem. And the police are there to respond to something that already occurred. So we're removing the problem and it's gone. Well, it's not gone because that person who may be removed for a day, for a moment, may just get a citation, still is in the community. So how do we embrace our community with the flaws that we have as a community? And that is where restorative work is that we are all flawed, we all have, we're all part of this, and how do we help one another to be our best? Because even if, as people are, there may be a need for people to be separated from the community for a while, incarceration, just because of certain behaviors are very harmful, just to give a break. But then how do we, as they come back, some of the big questions is, what are the obligations of the community to welcome them back? How do we help them actually be employed? How do we help them have housing that isn't connecting them back to places where that they'll easily go back to, behaviors, or if they're only close connections are people with felonies, but they're also the support network. They can't be there because the criminal justice says you can't be around other felons. So there's a whole bunch of things that restorative justice brings up, questions that as we go through things, it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do here? I know one of the big things is downtown is public urination. That was always a huge thing. It's like, so how do we deal with it? And a lot of times the community members are like, we got to be talking to our city officials about this. So it's also about what the community ends up doing in answering some of that.
I want to be mindful of our time.
Yeah, I can't see the clock.
Yeah. So how much time do
I can't, the glare's on it.
How much? Okay,
Okay.
and we need some time, I don't know, for any questions,
yep.
and right, I think.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
all right.
So you want to talk about what's...
Yep. So there are different ways to get involved with, if this is sounding like something you're really interested in. If you want to get involved in our conferencing, Tina will be the one that you want to contact to observe our process, to learn about the youth and adult programs, and then have opportunities to get trained. We have events and things posted on our Facebook. You can keep up to date like that. You can become a board member or join one of our working committees. COVID's been a tough time to get board members, so we're always looking for, for that input. But the other thing that just came up too is that Bolero Flats community is seeking trauma and healing spaces, and so they reached out to RJCA through one of our partner organizations, and so we are working with Westminster. There are going to be 2 days of counseling for walk-in for Bolero Flats residents, and then we're holding 2 healing circles with Bolero Flats residents this coming weekend in the support of Westminster, and that's going to cost some money. So if you wanted to go to our website's on the first one, is on the very first. So if you go to our website and you want to specifically donate to the Bolero Flats work that's going to happen this week, go to our website and in the donation page say Bolero Flats or Amir Locke, and it'll go to support that work of providing counseling this week and also the healing circles this coming weekend. All right, we're open for questions.
I guess I have a question, because everybody's mindset, I think, that prior to this work is you just put them in the system, right? You just put them in the system and they pay for their crime. So there are likely some people that you work with, some of your participants that I referred, that end up in the system anyway because of the type of crime that they did. do you work with them once they're released, or what is your role other than the support of, I mean, there's so many social determinants of in society that kind of support this undesirable behavior because of the lack of resources. So what do you do when they actually have to pay for a crime by going to prison, and then do you have any relationship with them after they come out?
Yeah, we don't do any direct re-entry work. There are organizations that do that. Some of our referred participants, especially those in drug court, have been in prison. But as far as direct re-entry out of, no. We have had some of our community members who have been incarcerated previously participate in our conferences. But yeah, that re-entry work around that is done by some other organizations that focus on that.
Yeah, I would say again that our organization focuses on what we do really well, and what we try to do is partner with others who do the other work. And our work is primarily at the first entry into the criminal legal system. So misdemeanor offenses, felony, it's all diversion. So we're getting them like with the first time offense, even though they may have been doing it for a while, this is like the first time they've been caught. And so
Except for drug court.
For drug court. And then, but what we do best is when they're supported by other things. So like drug court, we are part of the process. They're still going through the full of drug court, but this, our process is the first time they get to really feel that they're connected back to the community. And that's key, because a lot of times, they go through all these programs that are siloed, but when we get to the conferencing model, we're helping them to connect those together and say you are part of the community. And I think that's the key, is that people need to feel like they belong to the community, and they can be their best selves in that community.
Cynthia, would you talk a minute about how you know as an organization that you're successful, and that the community is successful, and the referred party is successful? What measures show that that's a positive?
So success, how do we measure success? That's a very complicated, we can do, there's a basic number success in that the people referred to us and participated in a conference, historically over 90% complete their agreement. So they've met with people, the agreement they created in the conference, they've fully completed, and they are done. The other successes is that that there is a relationship that is built in that space. I think that a sense of humanity and belonging is created in that space. People are at different places in their lives, but if they feel like they are connected somehow, that's a success. A lot of people, when we were collecting a lot of surveys and we were face-to-face and could collect them easier, is the sense of that they would recommend this to somebody else in the same situation. Community members, we have community members who have been with us for 10 to 20 years. Over a third of our community members have been volunteering over 5 years. And so there's a lot of connectedness and a sense of, also there have been a few studies, and again, this has to be done in cooperation with the criminal legal system, about our effectiveness being about 30% better than the traditional system. So, being that they don't go back and have another charge. So in recidivism, we're about 30% better than the traditional system. Even just attending the conference, if not completely fulfilling the conference. Those numbers are hard to do in because of privacy issues. I should have had that one from the police department. The University of Minnesota researcher that's working with our youth work has done a flyer, and I will try to get that somehow here too. There's also the cost of to the community over time of having been diverted or continuing in the traditional system, and there's so that's something new too.
If you measure success, how do you measure success? I facilitate a lot of conferences. And what I notice, if success is measured by sometimes a participant at the end of the conference, hey, can we get together again at the end of my agreement? I want to get back together with you guys. We have one scheduled, and we will do that if people ask for that. So we know we've made a difference. That's success to me. If we have all these new community people who are interested in this work, coming and doing it, that means that's success to me. That means it's having an impact, that it has meaning for people, that it's getting us somewhere. If it's in the conversation and if it happens in the space of the conference where you can feel the connection that people are making, that to me is success.
And as you see two white ladies standing up here, the other success with racial equity is the partnerships that we're building, and that our communities of color are becoming more engaged. And my goal and the goal of RJCA is creating more avenues for people to get involved in this work that wouldn't have necessarily a 501c3 and insurance. They come through our organizations and can be providers without having to have that whole administrative overhead. So we're creating an avenue, and a lot of our circle keepers are practitioners of color. So we're engaging the community and creating that race equity in who's meeting with our referred participants.
Are there any other questions, comments? Do you have anything else you'd like to say?
So with the Bolero Flats that's happening this week, if anybody's also interested in perhaps being, I'm thinking that maybe we might need some hosts in Westminster to help direct people on those days. I'm not quite sure what the days are, but I'm working with Reverend Tyler on this, so maybe Reverend Tyler would be the one to help us coordinate that if that's something of interest. But otherwise, donating would be great.
Okay, that's really wonderful. Thank you so much.
And I think we're just whetting your appetite, so to speak, and talking about this, and we can talk for hours and do all kinds of activities to kind of continue to get this work under, not just out of our heads. This is hard work and into our bones. And so I encourage you, if you're interested, even want to learn more about the origins of restorative work and circle work, it's so important to know that too, as we continue to learn that. And how do we be with each other in a way that builds community, that is transformational, that is restorative, so we don't fear each other. So our initial impact is, is not to call the police when we're troubled. Like, what is happening? How do we support each other? And how do we really see outside of our own lenses what is going on in our communities and how we all can be a part of healing and change and creating that sense of community. So that's all I got.
Well, that's plenty, I'd say. I think it's difficult to wrap our heads around a different paradigm shift of how we look at criminal justice and how we help people heal and how we keep people out of the system before they're kind of embedded in it. So we want to thank you, Cynthia and Tina, for sharing your insights and perspectives. We greatly appreciate you sharing these with us today. Next Sunday, for our forums, we welcome Maria Reagan Gonzalez. She's Assistant Director of Equity Initiatives at M Health Fairview, speaking on health equity. Please join us then.